All right, I'm going to do this just because I can.
Yeah, come on.
Ooh. What a feeling of power I have. Good evening. I'm Carlos Kalmar, music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Your imitation of my accent is amazing.
And this is my colleague, Robert McBride.
I work at 89.9.
Oh, what a thrill it would be. Can you imagine to stand here and conduct, 200 musicians or however many there are, in this music that we're going to hear tonight? Oh, well, must be fun to have talent.
Come on.
I have to
as if
say,
you wouldn't have one.
You do put your talent to very good use.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice.
Yeah, nice work if you can get it. Okay. War Requiem, Benjamin Britten. How many people have never been to a concert with this piece? Look at all those people. Yeah. Oh, you're just so in for a wonderful, profound evening. I was just talking with Mia backstage, who will be conducting the offstage children's choir, 30 young singers between the ages of 10 and 13, and she said this is the most profound piece she's ever worked on.
Probably I mean, it's probably one of the most profound pieces, period. Yeah. I mean, it's very hard to think what can top this. I mean, first of all, what is the point on making comparisons? Second, if you make comparisons, you can only go probably towards requiems per se. Mm. And I mean, there are a couple of very profound requiems
but nothing quite like this, with the combination of the ancient Latin text and the mixed choir, the children's choir, 3 soloists. Almost all of the time, the 2 men are singing completely different words. World War I poetry from the trenches by Wilfred Owen. I learned something today about that great English writer. The day of the armistice, the very day that World War I officially came to an end and there was much rejoicing and church bells ringing, that was the day his parents found out that he was killed in battle a week before. And he didn't even have to go back to the front lines. He volunteered to do it.
Yeah, don't volunteer. Well, never mind.
Life is not for wimps.
Life is not fair.
And it's not fair. Life is a 4-letter word.
You have talent.
Of a sort, yeah. So, it's an incredible piece of music, which I've had the pleasure of hearing before when the Oregon Symphony did it back in 1997. My only other experience with it. This is really a rare opportunity, so thank you for bringing us Britten's War Requiem tonight.
Well, unfortunately, Britten's War Requiem, which was, it's a piece that was commissioned. It's not a piece that Benjamin Britten, the composer, just wrote because it occurred to him. He was approached. And it's a piece that already when he thought, before he even started writing a note, the world was pretty aware that this would be an enormous undertaking. Meaning he was very clearly from the beginning that he would be trying to write a piece that relates to all wars, all of them. War in general as an idea and what happens, and in, of course, Britten's mind, why on earth do neighboring nations go to war against each other? Because actually the history why this piece was commissioned is deeply rooted in what happened in World War II. So in 1940, the Germans, in the famous Blitzkrieg, bombed Great Britain, and they attacked the city of Coventry. And in this city of Coventry, there was this magnificent cathedral cathedral, the Coventry Cathedral, which was an old building from the 14th century. And from what I read, I just read it barely half an hour ago, was in this cathedral there was an organ, which was, of course, an old organ, on which supposedly, allegedly, Mr. Georg Friedrich Händel had played. And the cathedral was being targeted by German bombs, which had no other reason other than to break the British spirit. And, well, ruins were left, everything was burned down, and years later, the Brits had the idea of rebuilding a cathedral. And Basil Spence, Sir Basil Spence, was the architect, and he envisioned something that kind of incorporates the ruins. So the ruins are being left as they are, and the new building is side by side to the old building. So that there's always this remembrance of what war actually did. And for the inauguration of this new cathedral in the year 1962, they went to Benjamin Britten and asked him for a piece. Interesting to say that he was not the first choice.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, he wasn't. Because it's actually, when you read about, not only about this piece, even when you read the piece itself, meaning in the program book we have the lyrics, and you have the Latin traditional Requiem text side by side, often kind of interrupted, with poetry by Wilfred Owen, you realize that there might be some controversy about this piece. I mean, we just take, because we know that, okay, War Requiem, one of the greatest pieces of 20th century, and we kind of say, okay, it kind of is a piece about war and it has a very powerful pacifist message. But was that really what people had in mind when they rebuilt the Cathedral of Coventry? Well, you have to know that in Britain, same as in every other country, there are people who think that, okay, let's just go with what Benjamin Britten might come up with. And there are people who think otherwise. People who think, probably rightly so, that there should be something majestical, something uplifting on this occasion, because we have just rebuilt one of our important cathedrals. So they went, allegedly, to Sir Arthur Bliss. And because Bliss at that time was Her Majesty's the Queen composer. And Bliss was also very well known for doing this kind of majestic, celebratory kind of, whether uplifting or not, kind of music. But Bliss declined the offer and said, sorry, busy. I'm writing a different piece, which is called the Beatitudes, which is his most important piece. It's kind of a little side story. So they went to Benjamin Britten, knowing that Benjamin Britten, the good news is Benjamin Britten was famous. And Benjamin Britten was, even by his adversaries, considered the biggest talent in English music. He was in his 40s at the time of this commission. But everybody also knew that this was a person, a composer, an artist, who definitely had a mind of his own. And his mind was, so the criticism, very often politically slightly left of the middle. Therefore, he had written pieces that were not exactly what you expect. And the British knew, actually, that, watch out, Benjamin Britten, oh, wait a second, that's that guy.
Yeah, you did a piece last season.
I did a piece last season, which was the Ballad of Heroes, which is already one of those grim pieces of music that are in commemoration of all the fallen soldiers in Spanish Civil War. But the real issue with commissioning Benjamin Britten was actually maybe 20 years before this one, 18. Britten was 26, and he received a secret commission to commemorate the anniversary of a foreign country, meaning something, wow, he had to write. He received quite a hefty sum of money for that, and they didn't tell him for what he had to write. He only knew it's probably a monarchy or some sort of thing like that, and it is some big year, so I have to write that. What did he come up? He actually did not really obey the rules. He wrote the Sinfonia, the Requiem, which is not exactly an uplifting piece, and it's on our first CD of the Oregon Symphony called Music for a Time of War.
Which you can buy in the lobby tonight if you don't already have a copy.
A fantastic piece of music that has it's only orchestral and has a very clear anti-war message. But, well, Britain later found out, as did the world, that, oh boy, the country for which he had written was Japan. And the Japanese, in all friendliness, which they are capable of, they rejected the piece because, first of all, it was not exactly the character of music they wanted, and secondly, the piece itself, Sinfonia da Requiem, had a lot of allegation to a liturgy that the Japanese are not really about. So this is actually the composer the Cathedral of Coventry went to when it came to commission something to. So they,
then,
during
the Second World War, this pacifist composer was a conscientious objector, and he spent the war years in America.
He was in America, and then this is, I mean, not that there's too much information, but so you understand what this wonderful artist and composer was about. He even was this close to write a huge oratorio titled Mea Culpa, translated...
Mea culpa, as in my fault?
Yes. Oh, yes. He was this close to writing one with his librettist at the time, Robert Duncan, which was targeted towards mourning the victims of the atomic bomb. I mean, trouble was in the air. And then Britain comes and delivers this piece, and this piece is, you know, it's kind of difficult to explain it in words, but I always think that we here, just to get to this wonderful hall, this amazing orchestra, and the choruses you're going to hear, we sometimes deliver pieces, and we live through pieces with all of you that can be very intense and extremely meaningful and very, very emotional. We have played several symphonies by Gustav Mahler here. We last week, if you want to say it this way, suffered through the horrific things that Dmitri Shostakovich wrote in his 10th symphony. It blows your mind. And then we come and say, it's not that we say, okay, let's top that. But when there is War Requiem by Benjamin Britten, what are you supposed to actually explain?
Well, and this is the 100th anniversary of his birth, so there's a lot of Britten going on, and
yeah, and
better.
probably this is the year where you can catch a couple of War Requiems. Yeah.
Here, tonight and tomorrow. Do take the time when Carlos and I are done speaking tonight, before the concert starts, to read your program notes and maybe look over some of Wilfred Owen's poetry. It will help inform your listening of the War Requiem tonight. I'm curious, how many people here actually served in war at some time? A few. Thank you for doing that. I never did that, so I can't imagine. I know I cannot imagine what that was like. And when I read the poetry that's in your program book tonight and read about Mr. Owen and what he went through, I try to wrap my head around it, but it's hard. But what Britten does, by using music, this deeply internal art that can say things that words alone cannot, when he gets his hands on that poetry, then it makes it real in a more visceral way, a more spiritual way, and a kind of miraculous way.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it. Actually, the one of the fascination of this piece, you will hear it tonight, is how can you actually reconcile in one piece two things that cannot possibly go together, which are a Latin traditional Requiem text, which Latin traditional Requiem text, as written by Mozart, Verdi, Berlioz, etc., all this forêt, sublime music. What does the Latin Requiem text actually do? It takes you through the mourning of the dead, through the day of wrath, all these horrible things, and at the end there is this, not the cry, there is this, give us peace, and there is peace at the end. How can you reconcile that with this enormously pessimistic, searing poetry by Owen? Because the poetry by Owen is everything else rather than optimistic. It's very pessimistic, and it speaks very clearly about the horrors of war and what war does to mankind. So there are several examples in this piece where it happens that way, that the Latin text and the poetry by Owen go one after the other, and it does something to, I think it does something to you. It doesn't leave you like that. So just more examples, but two examples. One is, in the Latin text, there is this moment when we talk in the Requiem about the promise that God made to Abraham and his seed. Meaning what he told Abraham and his seed is, to say it in our modern ways, you're going to be okay, everything is going to be great. And what now, the genius Britten utilizes that and tells the story of Abraham going to sacrifice his son Isaac, as being told by God. And he binds the youth, and Isaac says, "Father, what are you doing?" And he kind of, we probably all know this story of the Bible. He lifts the knife, and there is an angel who tells Abraham, "Don't do it. There is a ram, and bring the ram as an offering to God instead of your son." And from that idea, of course, emanates this idea that God promises Abraham and his seed that everything will be okay. Owen takes exactly that same story and tells the story in English. You can read it tonight during the concert, and then says that Abraham actually disobeyed God and slew his son, and with him half of the seed of Europe, one by one. And this is being repeated and repeated while the children sing the hostias, which speaks about the sanctity. It's incredibly powerful, meaning all this, you expect glory and you end in complete darkness. And musically, it's amazing. And the other one is, then we come to towards the end. Before we all ask for peace, there comes this moment when we, in the chorus in the Latin text, there is this libera me, free us from everything, so we can go to heaven. And this, it gets enormous. And it starts with this little music, like this anguished cry from the chorus for Libera me. And it gets bigger, faster, explodes like a majestic cry, and then it dies down. And exactly at the moment when it dies down, the two singers take over with poetry by Owen. And the poetry is a dialogue, imaginary dialogue, between an English soldier and a German soldier. And essentially the message can be summarized in the pretty much last sentences they say, which is, I am the enemy you killed, my friend. I knew you in the dark. And after that, there is silence, and then is this incredibly beautiful music to the words, let us sleep now. And with that, pretty much the piece ends. It's a very meaningful, very powerful piece.
And it's the only thing on the program tonight?
Well, you cannot really plan anything with this.
Yeah. Okay. So it's good that you're here now, and you're not going to be arriving late and being.
Yeah, there is. I mean, we
frustrated.
talked. Trust me, we at the Oregon Symphony, we talked about late seating. How? The piece is 85 minutes long, pretty much, and no break, nothing. You just go through it, through the entire journey that Britten takes you. So who is late is going to be confined probably to the last 2 rows, and he's going to be allowed into the hall when the Dies Irae, the traditional Dies Irae, which is what you expect. Dies Irae, you always expect blasting music. Oh yeah, it does that.
A little bit like Verdi does in his Requiem.
Yeah, something like that.
He doesn't hit you over the head quite as hard as Verdi does.
Yeah, Verdi is more, but there is some power here.
My favorite part is the Sanctus, when everybody's really wailing, and the brass and the choruses, whoops, and the choruses, and it's, yeah.
It's hard to say which one is the favorite part, because there are parts which are so incredibly beautiful.
And there's so much variety.
Yeah.
And the piece is so deep and so complex that you could study it for the rest of your life.
Just before you say we have to stop and I need to get dressed or something, just something technical, because it's very unusual. You are going to see on this stage a large chorus, the usual way, a large orchestra, but an additional, there are 2 orchestras on stage. One is, the small orchestra is just over there, on that corner.
So those would be principal players in the orchestra,
Yeah.
in their own separate little band.
And they're separated, a big orchestra here, chorus for children with their conductor outside of the hall. That's the way Britten envisioned this entire thing. And musically, it's also very clearly separated. We explained Latin text. Latin text is always the chorus, the big orchestra, and the soprano soloist. English, Wilfrid Owens, always the 2 gentlemen, tenor and bass, and the small orchestras. And then there are the angels, because the angels are the children. There are 3 kind of layers. There is this horrible reality of war, the gentleman. There is the traditional Latin text, and then there are the angels with an organ just outside. And just how to utilize the angels is amazing.
I think you're going to be very glad you're here tonight. If you're not glad already, you should be glad. And in addition to Oregon Symphony recordings with Benjamin Britten's music, available in the lobby, the recordings of Britten's War Requiem as well. You might just want to take one of those home tonight. Thank you again, Maestro.
A pleasure.
Carlos Kalmar.
Robert McBride.